Welcome everybody to the April meeting of Access Europe. But as you can see from this slide here, this month we've got Dwayne Hookham, who's an MVP from 2001 to 2016. Dwayne has a website, Hooked on Access, and you can see the address there. And the files that go with today's presentation are already available on my website. Okay, Dwayne, I'll stop sharing. Over to you.
I think Colin basically said it all. I started working programming back in around 1980 and just fell in love with databases and made a career change from being a Parks and Rec guy to being a contract programmer and then eventually getting hired on at Nestle and working there for about 20 years. Almost all database stuff in manufacturing. So today's demo is actually some pulled out of some applications that I wrote, some of them as a contractor. So that would have been maybe 25 years ago. And I'm kind of a dinosaur when it comes to Microsoft Access. It basically could do everything I needed it to do from the probably version 2 or whatever. So none of this is fancy new. I'm not fancy new, and I really admire some of the things people are doing with embedding web controls and things like that are really, really cool. So, this is pretty much old school. So data by itself really has little or no value, just a bunch of records. And if we can aggregate them, if we can display them in a way that adds value to our data, that's kind of what we need to do as developers and programmers, and make it easy to pull valuable information out of that data. I have on this slide a graphic or a design that has impressed me over the years, and I've seen it many times. This Charles Joseph Menard's visualization of Napoleon in 1812, and one diagram gives so much information about how many men, how large his troops were when he started out, and his charge to Moscow, and then coming back and ending up with just a little. So this is a reference that we see once in a while if ever we do a search on graphics and presentation of data. And very rapidly you can kind of get some information out of there. Colors, fonts, shapes, positions, other kinds of formatting things can help us draw the eyes of the users into what is important, trying to create familiar patterns. And we understand what a tree looks like. And so a lot of our presentation can look like things we see around us every day. Calendars, and that's what primarily got this presentation going for me, was someone wanted an Outlook kind of a report out of some data in Microsoft Access. My philosophy has been to keep it simple. Keep it easy to maintain. I had a specification from a client that wanted an Outlook view with timeline along the left, dates, week across the top, and then having some kind of a visual boxes on here of appointments. And this is all fictitious data that I use just for the demo. But that vertical height and the position of each of those boxes depends on the starting time and the date and the duration. I don't like building things that require a lot of maintenance, that have to go in and make adjustments design-wise that a programmer might have to make. Creating applications that are data-driven was really key. I did look around for some other calendar creators and things like that, and there are a number of them out there. And Crystal has one, Richard Rost has some, and there's some others out there. Power BI has some great potential and has made some real huge breakthroughs in data presentation. And these are just some of them that I have kind of found and stole some screenshots and such from some others. None of them, I don't think, that I could find use some of the same approach that I've been using. What I'll start by doing is giving a demo of the weekly schedule by doctor. And this is the main form that comes up. So I'll just click on this to give you an idea of how this render. And then we'll go back and look at, it has multiple pages, one for each doctor and goes through the various weeks on here for a calendar. No special colors. The text box that we're seeing for these individual appointments, it's a standard format for a text box. So let's go back in and kind of take a look at, one of the key things here is it's only got a single actual text box that is displayed other than the timeline and stuff. So if we notice this patient box here, that's all that, we're really displaying. We're using, well, and then the doctor, which we can use as, actually I use, as a heading on here. So there's basically code that moves those text boxes around and formats them as needed. This is all the code that it takes. And again, I said, keep it really simple. I usually try to make some definitions of all of my kind of constants and things like that up on the top of my code. You'll find some of them down below. I think where I did 2160, which, on the very bottom there in the code, which typically I'd put towards the top, but I'm not quite sure why I had it down in there. I usually define those memory variables and then use them. A couple of the key things here, and probably the most key, is the me.move layout equals false. And before the presentation today, I did a search on just access move layout. I got thousands of hits on it. So people are using it. And for whatever reason, if it's a calendar, if it's some other kind of formatting that they wanted to do, it's kind of a hidden method, but it's very powerful. Within this, I have a patient text box that is the main display on here. It's the one with the kind of stands out. And it's all I do is I set the top and use kind of a date different in terms of minutes from the scheduled start to the start time of the whole calendar, which is like 8 o'clock. That's our start time. So I find out what that difference is, and I multiply that times kind of a scaling factor, which is the number of TWIPs of 1 minute. Then I set the height. Again there, I multiply, I use the 1 minute, the long memory variable for 1 minute, and I use a date difference in minutes from the start time to the end time. So that can set the height of that text box. And then I set the left property of that same text box to based off of the day of the week. That report is grouped by the week. So we'll go on and take a look at the design of that. The key things is that my detail section and my week of footer are the same height. And I put a number of items like the weekdays. So I have the week of is how I'm grouping my report. And I'll just go into the query to show you how I calculate that. So I just simply figure out what the Monday of the week from any of the dates. I don't know if I can show that a bit bigger. And we'll format that font. We'll get that up a bit bigger. So I just take the scheduled date and I subtract the weekday from the scheduled date, and then I add 1. And that's what gets me the week of. So that's my initial group. I group by doctor first, and then the week of, and then by the start time. So the code is really pretty simple. If I go into the code, this is all on the on format event. And I just set some basics to get my scaling and stuff correct and the size of a minute and things like that, and then just simply draw it. There are some limitations here, and it isn't really designed to handle events that are outside standard schedule. Like if I had a event that like on a Saturday or a Sunday or something that goes later into the evening, I don't have code in here to kind of compensate for that, to say, okay, if I think my time scale went from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. If something actually went until 8 p.m., I don't truncate that back to 6 p.m. and show any kind of indication that it actually goes longer. I wanted to keep it simple. Some of the text boxes for these events with the patient name, they're not overly large. I mean, and we have some of the same limitation with other calendars, like from Outlook or Google Calendar or whatever. We don't have a whole lot of room to display much more than just a name. Again, we can use some colors, we can use some other kinds of things to provide some other information. I did not dynamically draw the time scale on the left-hand side. And one version I had done that, but then my computer crashed. And when I brought it in, I mistakenly told them to wipe out the hard drive and start over. So luckily I had some of my, or almost all my other stuff saved, but just dynamically drawing that time scale on the left using the print method and the line method within the week of formatting of that. And in this example, I didn't incorporate any filtering of dates. There's no form that says from this date to this date or only this doctor or any of that kind of stuff. So, which again would be pretty easy, but keeping it simple, I didn't put that in. Additional information could potentially be added. I think we look at our Outlook calendars, we might have a task list on the right-hand side. Well, you could put a sub-report on the right-hand side of the week of group section, and then we could use that to display tasks or other kinds of things. And so we do have an opportunity to do that if we want. The next one is the daily schedule for all of the doctors. So we'll go in and take a look at that one. And so instead of a week at a glance, this one is basically a daily of the 3 different doctors and then their patients. And we can zoom that a little bit bigger. So again, we just have the doctors across the top. We have a similar timeline down the left-hand side with the names of the patients on here. And I think we'll just jump right back to the PowerPoint. And it's very similar to the week at a glance. Again, the horizontal position is determined by left to right by the doctor. And it's just a simple kind of black and white. And it's, again, this time, instead of being grouped by the week of, it's grouped by scheduled date. And then the detail section and the schedule date footer are both 7 inches high. And so we'll go back out and look at the design of that. Really pretty simple. When we look at the details section format event, again, very, very few lines of code. Otherwise, it's very similar to what we had before, where we're setting the patient top, height, and left properties on here. I think we all love to write code, and I love to write code, but keeping it simple and maintainable and then adding in comments and stuff is kind of what I go for on this. There's what we just looked at. And again, we have the same limitations in here, in terms of, I didn't put any error handling in terms of the events that might be drawn outside of the section, and the text boxes are small, and again, we could draw the time scale dynamically and incorporate some filtering.
Aid asked a question about the small text, which you've been talking about earlier. Just one thought. I mean, you can obviously, on a form, you can use Shift and F2 to bring up a zoom box. I don't know whether you could do that I know you can't do it in print preview on a report. Whether you could do it in report view, I'm not sure. But the obvious problem is, of course, your calendar reports won't look the same in report view as they do in print preview.
And I did forget to mention, and thanks for that, that all of this is VBA dependent in order to get the formatting correct. So that is a bit of a limitation. Personally, I don't use a lot of other views, like any dynamic views. I always go to the print preview where VBA is going to run. And these look totally different format wise if you don't. And you may even get a an error message or something if you try to open them without using the print preview mode or
Well,
printing it out.
Adrian,
You've got the value 2160 in there for determining how far across
Yes.
per
Yeah.
depth. And I was wondering, is there not something in that first column that, say, the first text box, it wouldn't be exactly that size because you wouldn't want them that close to each other. But if you had something in there which was the actual width that you want to assign for that, and then you just take the width of that to use as a multiplier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you know, a great point. A number of my report designs, I will drop a vertical red line right centered in a page in a report.
Mhm.
That allows me, because when you're, let's say if we go in and click design here, when I grab, well, I don't see the handles on this one. I thought it would show me, yeah, well, it does when I let go. You know, it has the little handles on the top and bottom that are right in the middle. So I will, that's a great point, because I will use that on occasion. There's the next report I'm going to show with the crew rotation actually has a box at the top that I refer to. And so if I want to make some changes on some report designs, I can go in there and simply change the size of a text box or another box, or change the size of a line, and then everything will be rendered based off of that size. So very good point, Aid. The next one is the demo of the crew rotation schedule. That one was, again, it was another request. Somebody wanted to had actual ship crews and their schedule or their rotation. So, you know, we kind of worked together and built this one. This one I did use some different colors. For these colors were based off of the vessel, and those values are basically stored in my table of vessel. Well, we'll look to see how I put the months in here, but you know, I have beginning and ending dates and the captain's name in a text box, then use those other colors. This does have a sub report that basically shows the data source for what is used to draw that. On the bottom, it does say that this was a report that I had developed for somebody, or maybe he maybe actually did it and sent it to me. Our grouping here is by vessel. So each, you know, has a vessel footer, and the detail section and the vessel footer are basically the same height. They're both 0.3 inches. And then I do use color in this one just so you can see that, you know, that can add hopefully something to your report. And we'll go on and we'll actually take a look at the code on that one. So that's the rotation report. Yeah, and again, you know, I did the days of the week by just using a date add. You know, I'll send in a particular date or something, and then just continue to add a month across the top, or add an hour, or add a day, or whatever it might be. One of the things that you also you need to keep in mind, and I think it's still the same, that if you want to refer to that color within your report, because I have the, you know, I have the crew member showing, and you want to be able to provide a different color, and then also the start and end date I'm using within the code of that detail format section, you need to bind those data values to controls. They don't have to be visible, of course, and I think if you're going to refer to them in code, they've got to be there. The code here, we'll just go into details section, event. Very simple. Same thing. Here I use my timeline is basically a year. It's an annual kind of a report. So I do just exactly what Aid had just suggested. I have this box timeline. And so in my report, that box timeline, find it up here. No, it's hard to grab it unless I just come down. Yeah. So that box timeline is what basically is a rectangle drawn around my monthly dates at the top. When I'm writing my code, I refer to that. If I wanted to, let's say, put a sub report on the right-hand side that had some additional information or whatever, I could shrink those text boxes and then shrink that box timeline and not have to touch my code. You still have to go into the design with this to change the graphics or, the objects like that, but probably don't have to go into code to do that. The next one is a dual value chart. And again, this is a chart that a client asked for. They wanted a dual value kind of a chart. And I just couldn't find anything that was available as a chart control or a format of a chart. So, in the report design, my controls are positioned almost randomly. Doesn't really make any difference where I put them. This one uses a little bit of math like the others to do some calculations, and I got some mistakes on this, so sorry about that. That's called copy and paste of a code in my PowerPoint slides. So we'll just go into this one and take a look at it. This chart is displaying by groups. Each of these bars is kind of a group of a salary range. So it starts at 40,000 on the left and 100,000 on the right. The width of each of these bars is determined by the number of employees that are within that salary range. So it gives us a couple different visual numbers here in terms of both the salary range, going from left to right, and then the height. So that area gives us an idea of how much of our total salary dollars are applied within that salary range. And it has some real kind of similar code to what we've seen before. So that's 2D graph. We have some of the same stuff. I am using these vertical orientated text boxes just because they seem to fit better with this. And then we'll look at the on format, and a lot of comments in here. Got to have my spacing between the bars, my bar height, the space per employee. And that's what I use to calculate what the width of that should be. Again, I do have box border height. That is actually in my footer here. That takes up the whole, gives me my kind of my rectangle. That's my border for my graph. And again, like Aid suggested, use it. If you got it there, use it. And if I change the size of that, it's going to change the whole chart. One of the keys here again is using the move layout and setting it to false. And that basically all that does is it creates layers, layer upon layer of the detail section. One, it renders once for every record within that group. Then it hits the next section, which is that group section, the group footer, and it basically deposits all of the layers one on top of the other. I have a count of the salary within my query that I have bound, and that just says, well, how many people are in that salary range? And then in setting the top and the width and a little bit more math here, because you really want, with the height of it, you want all of the bottoms of the bar to line up. And I have done some of my own real simple graphing using the kind of the same code. You can do a lot by taking your data and drawing your own bars or your own lines. It's not nearly as much code as like Crystal puts into a lot of her graphics that she does, but it can be very simple, and these things can be done without ever using a chart control. I don't know if we have any questions on this dual, and we'll go into the print preview.
I'd just like to add, when you showed me that yesterday, I'd never even thought of doing a chart like that before. So I think there's lots of potential use of that idea.
Yeah, and that's kind of what the idea of my presentation is, not necessarily to show exactly how you should be using it, but to kind of open up your eyes to say, oh, okay, I didn't know I could do that. I could apply that elsewhere. The last calendar style, I think a lot of us have done this, but one of the questions I typically see on news groups, and it's not always a calendar, but when you have a text boxes within a section of a report that can grow, and each of these dates on here are basically one date. So this is it uses the same sub-report in here 5 times, and again we're grouped by week of. There's so the same sub-report renders 5 times using link master, link child to the text boxes that we see at the top that have the date, and these are going to vary in height, but we still want to get a line or a box drawn around it. If we didn't use some code, our lines would vary in here and it would look really not very good. And we've seen the same thing when you're dealing with some memo fields and such in reports, and you want to have nice lines around everything, and that takes some code. We'll look at that code just real quickly. Now, the key here is that all of my other code I did in the on format event. The code for this particular report must be done in the on print. And the reason for that is if you try to do it in the on format, it grabs the height of the original height. It doesn't grab the grown height, the total rendered height. And so that's only available in the print. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm setting up a memory variable I and looping through it like from 1 to 5, and my sub-reports are named SRPT 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So in the on print, I just loop through those to find out which one of those has the highest value in the height. And then I grab, I have text for a day, and I have that height, and I multiply it times the height. And then I just draw my 5 rectangles using the line method around those calendar dates. And I think most of us here have done that, but for those who haven't, the key takeaways here is basically to use the detail, print versus format event, because a format event, it's going to give you the height, this original height, and that doesn't work. Just wondering if anybody had any ideas for other kinds of uses of the move layout and drawing your data using the lines and rectangles and things like that.
If anyone would like to ask a question, please turn your microphone on, and I will pass over to you, Adrian. Your microphone's on.
Thank you. Yes. I didn't really get the move layout. As things went on later, I got clues as to what it might mean. And if it means what I think it means, then I'm quite astounded. I didn't realize this would be possible. I think it's very powerful and very important. When you say move layout, so if you turn it off as you're doing, would you mind showing the code that you showed in your first example?
Yeah.
I sort of wanted to go back to that and that's on format of the detail section. Is that right?
Correct.
So you have a single text box in there, and
that's visible.
One visible text box in there.
Yeah.
Okay. And this patient is the name of that text box?
Yes.
So what you're doing is you're printing that, or you're preparing it for printing. And then
yes,
instead of normally when you have a detail section that prints, it then moves down to below that particular one and does the next
exactly
one. Now, what I'm guessing, what I'm assuming, that, and you may have explained it very well and I just missed it, but move layout means that instead of printing that, then it keeps that top pointer where it started. And the next time you come to do the same thing, and you're moving this stuff around within the detail section, the next time you come to do this, it essentially overlays what you did before. So every single one of those boxes that get displayed in the calendar format thing is all printed over each other. They're all starting in the same position,
right?
Overlay each other. What is it that causes that to print?
The next section. It just shows up. It's almost like setting up, because you have the number of appointments is the number of records, and you just continue to layer those one on top of the other. And when you get to a section that does render, that's when it puts them all on the screen. So they're actually not even appearing in what would be considered the detail section. They're just all appearing in that week of footer section. That's where they all render kind of as a batch.
Can I just carry on from that Ace question?
Please.
Several years ago, I did a lot of calendar reports, but with infinitely more code than this. And I don't believe I've ever used move layout equals false. And I certainly will explore that myself. Can I just check, if you didn't put that line in, by default, it would be true. Is that right?
Correct. By default, it's always true.
Right. So can you comment it out and just show us one of these reports without that line and show us how it goes wrong?
Okay. So there is one of them. Here's the next page, next page, next page, next page. So, the code is running to basically render that text box, but it renders the details section on a page.
Right. So now if you turn that one back to false again, so we can see what it is.
That was false, or back to false. Yeah, just a second here.
Maybe one with maybe the second one, which had more information on the screen, might be even more effective.
Okay.
Way of showing this.
So
anyway,
if I set it to false.
Yeah. And now see again.
Do a print preview, and all of those pages or layers are now displayed at one time. And I did demo this at MVP Summit 15 years ago. I think Jeff was maybe there. I remember Peter Deering being there, because he I think he made a comment. And typically when I think I've done something unique, Peter's already done it. But Conrad was also, I believe, in the audience, and maybe as a softie at the time. And Jeff and I worked on something back when he was doing in his restaurant days. Yeah, what a pleasure. So then, because of finding out about move layout equals false, Jeff then was escalated to becoming an MVP, and then later escalated to being a softie. I think it's all because of move layout equals false, but I could be wrong.
I think everybody will be using it after this.
I think you're right, Dwayne.
Yeah. The other thing I've used this is, like, if you have a list of, let's say, product categories and products, and your product category is in a group header more on the left side of your page, and then your products are on the right half of the page, let's just say. But you lose a bunch of space in your header. If you have a whole bunch of information in your header, you can actually do a move layout on your header, on your category, your product category header, and then your product list the top of your product list will match the top of your category header. I had somebody, ask a question like that, or you're doing an employee directory and you don't want to give up the space that you put the department name in. You want the first name of an employee in that department to be up there with the same horizontal space as the department name. They're going to overlay, so you don't want to have the text boxes when they render, you don't want them to be on top of each other. So it's kind of establishing a vertical divide, keeping everything in your header or grouper on one group on one side of that and your details on the other. There are a number of different uses for that.
And Jeff has just put in the chat one of the uses. Jeff, do you want to talk about what you did with this?
Sure. Yeah. So I used Dwayne's techniques quite a bit. I was actually trying to post an image of one of the reports, but I'm not as familiar with Zoom. Obviously, I'm more familiar with Teams, and I couldn't actually pull something that was just from a local. I actually have the report up if you wanted to look at it real quick.
Is this the one you emailed me a few days ago?
Yeah, so
good.
I have a couple. Let me know if you can see it.
Wow.
Yep, we can. It's quite small
So-
at the moment.
Yeah, it's a little bit small. Not sure if I can zoom in a little bit here, but let me try. Is that a little bit better?
A lot better, yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
remember
so
some of these.
this was essentially all of the shifts for the various employees. You know, we had cooks, we had bakers, pantry, we had line servers. And so everyone's shift would be just sort of drawn using Dwayne's techniques. And then we could just literally print this out and post it in the back of the office, or if somebody wanted a copy, we could print out a copy of just their particular schedule. So this is one example where it was showing everybody. And then this other one was more specific. Oops, sorry, wrong one. I want to go back to here and select. I want with color. In this particular case, I wanted all the job codes. This was just a
Nice.
daily labor plan. And this literally replaced something that we had to do by hand. After we would create a schedule, we had pieces of paper that were formatted very similar to this. And we would have to just literally draw what everyone's shift start was and what shift end was, write in the names, how many hours. And then we would literally walk this around during our shifts. We would just fold it and put it in our pockets as managers. And so we would keep tabs on who's up for a break, who's about to come on shift, who's about to come off shift. So we would have each of these manually done each day after we would write a weekly schedule using Dwayne's techniques. That just in a minute just disappeared. Just getting the shifts into the system meant that we could just literally pull this up at a moment's notice. And if I had a shift manager that was in the back of the house, I could just say, okay, that person is cook, baker, and the dishwasher, let's say, for the back of the house. I could select just them. And then I would hand this to the back of the house manager, which would just cover their particular shifts. And similar, I could just do for the front of the house. So I could select individual groups. So the code here is very similar, if not exact, that Dwayne uses, but a little bit more because it's pulling some of the options selected from the form.
Yeah.
But that's what I've been used long ago. It saved us so much time, manual time. And, to me, for managers and regional managers, this was like, oh my gosh, this thing is just gold mine. It just saved the day. So that's all due to Dwayne's work.
Wonderful. Who needs projects either? You save
Yeah,
yourself.
I like the use of color. I mean, and
Yeah.
consistent color for, pantry is always that color, and bus and setup is
Correct.
red, and every report, it looks like you're using the same colors, which is great.
Yeah, so that was determined over here, where on a
Yeah.
form, we could basically determine what color we would want. And I just created my own little simple pick a color type thing,
Well, good.
which then just translated into the position colors that would then render. So at any time we could change these. If a new back of the house manager, I don't want that color for cook, I want a different color. So, okay, here,
Yeah.
you choose.
And if you want to add another job title, you don't have to do anything, probably.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Everything just
Everything shows.
flowed in magically. I do have to jump for another meeting, but thanks, Dwayne. It was really nice
thank you,
to
Jeff.
sit in on this.
Thanks, Jeff. That was an excellent example as well. Right, coming back to Dwayne, there was a question from Anne about the different events.
I don't have too much experience in terms of sort of specialized reporting like this, but I do recall reading once that if you're putting VBA into your report formatting and so on, you do need to be careful about where and how you do that, because, for example, if you preview a report, some of the events might not fire, and as opposed to where if you are actually printing a report. Is my assessment correct? And what are the pitfalls that you need to watch for example, between previewing a report and then actually printing it?
The one thing I've noticed, or there's probably a couple things, and that the on open, I think, might run a couple times. And I've seen there's like a format count and some things, but I haven't run into any problems with that. I did in a previous presentation do something with a table of contents where I need to render the report to dynamically add records to a table of contents table that's used as a sub-report in the header of the report. So I have to render the whole thing to a PDF. That gets me my, my table of contents from Pages and such. Delete the PDF, but then I have my table created. So that was critical. But I think the main thing here is that with the lines, drawing a rectangle around the can grow, you really need to do that in the on print. I don't know if anybody else has some comments on that.
I know the print count that you're referring to is to handle when people go forward in a report and then backwards. And then what happens is it gets reformatted. But for things like the page numbers, what's it? Volume table of contents, that gets affected by that. Because if you just assume it's going forward and you add one every time, it can muck up. So it allows you to know that this is the second time you've run this. So you might, if it's for incrementing the count of pages, for instance, obviously you wouldn't need to do. But if it was something along those lines, you would only do it for the first time it happened, or do it.
Yeah, and that's kind of critical, because sometimes you don't want your page count to start right on the first page, and sometimes you want that page count to start over again if it's orders or multiple client orders or customer orders. You want each customer to start over, so you typically might do that with code. That's where you really need to be careful, I think, with that. And like Aid was mentioning,
I would just say thanks. I mean, it's been brilliant. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks again from me as well, Dwayne. Okay, anyone who needs to leave, you can move layout equals true if you like, and go and place yourself somewhere else. Sorry, I've been trying to find a way of getting some sort of crap about. Where can I just ask? Where did you even find out about this code? Because I don't think I've ever seen it anywhere until you demonstrated it to me yesterday.
It was, like I say, it was 25 years ago, and I can't remember. I found it and I started using it, and maybe it was used differently, and then I thought, well, let's just try to apply it in this week at a glance thing. But I know I did not see a calendar created like that. Somebody might have. I think, like I mentioned, Peter had used some code similar to that. I would bet that Carl has done it, but I don't recall ever seeing anything prior to me using it.
Can I just a quick response from anyone? Is there anyone else here? Jeff's gone now. Anyone else here who has used it in the past? No. Anyone going to be using it in the future? I think, well, I certainly will be anyway. Okay, any other questions for Dwayne before we move on to the next part of the presentation? It was an excellent session. As I say, I've found one thing that I will certainly be testing out myself. I'm going to be looking at my old calendar reports, and I think I'll be looking at them with horror at how much code I used to achieve similar effects, probably not quite as well as you did.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I'm definitely going to explore Move Layout. I think I heard about it a long time ago, and I just didn't click what it was. But it's really useful.
Okay, you can draw your phases of the moon with them as well. No, I suppose you've got Move Layout equals true there. Right. If there's no other questions for Dwayne, thank you again from me. We will get the recording of this online fairly soon. It says there, next month, we've got PJ Bryant, whose avatar you saw earlier, or Peter Bryant, who's going to be doing a SQL Server-based topic. And Peter, if you would like to talk us through what you're going to be covering.
In the 3 sentences you allowed me.
In 6 or 7, if you like.
Okay. What I'm going to be demonstrating, and we'll put up code afterwards, is the stuff I've been using for probably a couple of decades or more now, which is based on Andy Couch's work to make to reconnect to SQL Server databases without using DSNs and doing it programmatically from within the app, so there's no user intervention. So you just start an app that's running on a different network that needs to connect to a different server with a different database name, and it just does all the reconnections for you, rebuilds all the indices over the SQL views, or recaptures the indexes over the SQL views, and you just carry on using the app thereafter. So it's been a massive time save for me. And the other tweak I have in there, that it flips between, you can flip it between 3 different instances of the same database. So if you move from test to UAT to live, you can switch between those databases.
Thank you, Peter. That's something I'll be really interested to see how you do it. For years, that's how I actually work with various different schools. I used to basically remove the connection, and then they would rebuild it on site with just a click of a button. But I'd be interested to see your method of doing it as well. Sounds excellent. So that's
Yes.
next month. That's the 3rd of May. At the same relative time as we are now, 6 p.m. UK time, and that's UTC +1 at the moment. And somebody, Peter Cole, has mentioned that if you've got the Axis 2002 Developers Handbook by Getz, Letwin, and whoever the third one was, it's in there. I've got the 2000 version, so I'll have a look in that one and see if it's there as well. So thank you for that, Peter. And thank you, Peter, for your outline for next month. Does anyone else have any points that they want to raise today? The third name for the 2002 book, different from the 2001, is Gundaloy. I have the 2001, as I said, which is my favorite ever book still. But obviously, I've not found the move layout, but if it's in there, hopefully we will see all of you next month. Thank you once again, both to Dwayne and in advance to Peter next month. You can download, just go back to this previous slide then, isleofdogs.co.uk AEU-14. You will get a zip file with a PDF version of Dwayne's presentation and also the ACCDB file for you to play with and move your layouts to your heart's content. Thanks again to everyone. I will see you next month.